And as people join us, that's all right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 2024 version of the Apprenticeship Virtual Learning Community. Hopefully you all got an email within the last, 15, 20 minutes reminding you of this meeting. It is a monthly meeting. You all should be on a listserv about it. And today we are talking about the differences between registered apprenticeship and unregistered apprenticeships. You're only going to hear from me for a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to some people that are actually doing boots on the ground work so you can really pick their brains and hear what they're doing so they can share ideas, what's worked, what hasn't worked, all those kinds of things. So, and that's really the purpose of this, is for everybody to be able to learn from each other, talk to each other, get some ideas, make some connections, and see what we can all do to maybe improve, continue our work as we go forward with apprenticeships. So, I don't think Levon is on here yet. She's supposed to be joining us, but she's got some other things going on right now, so she should be here shortly. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We'll go over briefly the agenda. Yes, please put your names and institution in the chat, just so I look at names and I go, I've heard that name. Are they with this school or that school? So if you can help me with that, that'd be great. We'll cover some definitions. We're going to talk about pros and cons again to registered, pros and cons to unregistered, and then just have an open discussion and question. So we will, next slide. Start with kind of what's the difference between registered and unregistered. Registered apprenticeships are considered the gold standard. Unregistered programs are simply another alternative. Both registered and unregistered programs at community colleges should always have these three pieces. They should always be education aligned, which makes sense because we're community colleges and education institutions. Employer driven, so you got to make sure that you're meeting the needs that your employers have, and incorporate the 7 key elements, hallmarks, they're called different things, of a RAP. And a RAP is a registered apprenticeship program for anyone that's new to this field. In Illinois, there are programs that do both of these, registered and unregistered. And it just depends on where your institution is comfortable, where your staff is comfortable, where your employers are comfortable. All of those pieces come into play. But hopefully after today, we will all have better ideas as to some of those goods and bads of doing one versus the other, and how does that look. Next slide, please. And I keep seeing everybody's names pop up, so that's great. The 7 key elements of an apprenticeship. And these, in order for a registered apprenticeship to be registered by the U.S. Department of Labor, often referred to as USDOL, individuals, they have to be hired up front in the apprenticeship program. This is not another form of work-based learning. It's not an internship. It's not an unpaid. They have to be hired by the employer. They are a full employee when they start the apprenticeship program. And these are 7 key elements of registered apprenticeships, but they're also key elements of an unregistered apprenticeship. You should have all of these pieces in an apprenticeship, whether it's registered or unregistered that you're doing. Again, industry led. So like I mentioned, you've got to have employer buy-in. They've got to be willing to work with you and fill some of the needs that they have. Paid job, we talked about that. The students have to be paid up front or hired up front, so they are receiving wages during this time. Structured on the job learning and or mentorship, that's a key piece. Supplemental education is where we often refer to RTI, registered related technical instruction. Sorry, I blanked for a minute. But that's a lot of times where the community colleges come into play with their coursework, and their education alignment is in that supplemental education that's helping these apprentices learn not just on the job, but also in a classroom supporting what they're doing on the job. Diversity. We know diversity is important, whether it's gender, age, race, language, ability level, disabilities. All of these are diversity pieces, and apprenticeship can add to all of those pieces at employers and different places. Quality and safety. Of course, we want our students to be safe in what they're doing. Employers should be following safety standards that are set out and laid out by OSHA for them. but we want to make sure that these aren't just, oh yeah, you can go do that risky job because you're just an apprentice. They should have the same safety obligations as every other person in that business. And credentials, they need to be earning credentials through this apprenticeship program. So sometimes those are smaller, short-term credentials. Some of those are longer credentials. Some of those are AA degrees. Some of those become bachelor's degrees. It just depends on what your apprenticeship program is set up to do. But those are the 7 key pieces that, whether you're doing registered or unregistered, you need to make sure that all 7 of these pieces are included in the apprenticeship that you're running. Next slide. Terms and definitions, already talked about USDOL, U.S. Department of Labor, but the OA is the Office of Apprenticeship. Registered just means it's filed and it's been approved by USDOL. Unregistered means it hasn't been filed or formally approved by USDOL. There are no other differences between registered and unregistered. RAPIDS is a common term you will hear. It is the Registered Apprenticeship Partners Information Database System. And I can only tell you what that is because it's written on the screen. I know it is RAPIDS. It's the database system where all of the student information gets plugged in. Some employer information gets plugged in there. That's how USDOL tracks everything, is through the RAPIDS data system. So when you hear somebody talk about entering students in RAPIDS, getting information out of RAPIDS, that's the database system that they're talking about. Sponsor, that is the organization that is ultimately responsible for making sure the registered apprenticeship program is run like it got approved, according to the program standards, federal regulations, and everything is in line. That's the sponsor's job. And some community colleges are sponsors, some are not. And I'm sure that's something that we will get into a little bit later today. But there's some beginning terms and definitions. Next slide. So now,
Angela.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, hey, just a quick question. On the unregistered, can we clarify that? Because you said they're except for being registered. The one thing to point out, I think, is that in an unregistered, you do have a lot more flexibility because yes, they have to have the 7, but you don't have to follow the same hourly limit. So I wanted to clarify that in case somebody who's not familiar with all of this, you can do much more flexible unregistered apprenticeships. And you don't have to follow that hour limit that you have with a registered apprenticeship. That's all I wanted to point out.
Excellent point. Thank you. I missed that stuff.
Yeah, no, you didn't miss anything. It's just,
right.
So,
and so she's right. I did say they were exactly the same. They are, but they're not. And it's just like any other apprenticeship. Some of your registered apprenticeship are going to vary and be different. So there is more flexibility in offering with an unregistered apprenticeship. All right, I am turning this over to Veronica Inselman from Heartland Community College. And I believe she's taking, am I right, Veronica? That's you.
Yeah,
fabulous.
Sounds good. Yep. Kurt Rendell, our Executive Director of Program Development and Innovation, is also here. And so he and I are going to talk through these slides together. We'll probably talk over each other and interrupt each other because we both get really excited when we talk about apprenticeships. And so the first pro, let's just hit it right out of the gate, right, is that the registered apprenticeships are the gold standard earn and learn model. And really how we want to look at that is that they are a standardized way of creating this this effective work model. And here at Heartland, all of our apprenticeships are registered. That is something that we decided to do right out of the gate. And in addition to many of the things that we'll talk about today, I do want to highlight that here at Heartland, we actually stand on some additional pillars that are not part of the 7 key elements. We actually, when approaching our employers, we let them know that we're expecting them to pay up front for the instructional costs. We're asking them to release their apprentices during their 40-hour work week to attend classes. And we ask them to pay them their hourly wage while they're here at the college in their classes. So far, we have really not gotten any pushback on that. And our program is very sustainable because of this. And we have employers that continue to send more apprentices. So we know that once they took that risk with us, the first cohort or the first apprentice, that they in fact also believe that what we're doing here, and by all standards, that would be registered apprenticeships, is a really good model for what they're doing. Kurt, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that not offering necessarily the choice between a registered and non-registered apprenticeship takes a lot of the variables and questions off the table. So if you can say, you know, it's completely up to you and your goals and the different grant projects you have. But we kind of keep it simple, so it's, you know, it takes a lot of uncertainty and back and forth out of the discussion. So we just say at Heartland, we've received grants from the state to launch our Office of Apprenticeship, and that pays for a lot of our time so we can keep the cost low for employers. And then really leaning into that gold standard element that, you know, if we worked with you to develop an apprenticeship program, and then maybe one of your competitors across towns launched an apprenticeship program, and they down the line make theirs registered and yours unregistered, you know, would that then put you at like a marketing disadvantage or anything? And so we try to just really build up that it's a gold standard. There's no one that's going to come in and kind of top that. So it positions them very strong, and then it keeps things simple. So we've just kind of gone that direction. And then you have a lot of flexibility because there's grants that'll cover and require DOL registered apprenticeships, but so far we haven't run into a grant that's only for non-registered apprenticeships. So kind of building it from this way, we can use all kinds of funding resources to help support that program.
Yep, agree with all that. Our next bullet point is just the occupational standards. And so these, those of you that are currently working in the apprenticeship area, whether it's registered or unregistered, you may be familiar with the work process schedules that are available through the apprenticeship.gov, and you would use a SOC code to find an occupation, and then it's going to give you an idea of what those what the competencies are that are required to be fully skilled at that occupation. In addition to that, we've got the National Occupational Frameworks, which that's being worked on from the Urban Institute, actually alongside or with the approval from the Department of Labor. So those frameworks are a little more built out with some additional information, but in addition, they also include those work process schedules, again, those competencies that are aligned to the on-the-job learning. And then for the frameworks, they actually would go into some related instruction that you would need, that is needed as well. So those are very what those do is they're no fuss, right? You know, you have a starting point. You don't have to have your employer wondering what they need to cover, and we don't need to have a place. We don't have to start from scratch. It's just all there, and it's very standardized. So keeping it standardized means that, and again, a big pro for registered apprenticeships is that as an apprentice joins a program and they're working through those competencies and through those with their on-the-job learning and their related instruction here at our college, then we know that when they're finished, when they're completed, they have met these standards. I actually had an apprentice talk to me. I asked them, you know, hey, so is this all worth it, right? How do you feel about this program? And they did indicate that had they not been here, learning the ways from our instructors, which they called it the industry way, they would have only learned the employer way. So I do think that using these occupational standards is important, and that is what is keeping it, again, back at that gold standard level. Anything else, Kurt? No? Okay. And Kurt kind of covered the potential state and federal funding for the sponsors. I put community colleges because that's who we all are, but you know, those funds are just key when we're trying to build our Office of Apprenticeship, when we are looking at ways to advance the programs here. You can use funding to build out apprenticeship programs by purchasing supplies, providing wraparound supports to the apprentices. You can, I know that we have taken into consideration a lot of times apprentices aren't fully equipped with technology that you need to, every day today with Wi-Fi and hotspots and all of these laptops and everything. So we do use our funding for that. I will indicate again that at Heartland, we do not use our funding to pay for tuition and fees for apprentices. And so we find other ways to use it. And we do help with some direct training costs for materials to eliminate barriers for apprentices. So we know that when we're working with our union partners, we have a relationship with them where we can help offset some direct training costs there. So
Sorry.
oh, you're fine. So we we do find other ways to use that money. Anything else there, Kurt? No. And then the employer tax credit, which we're all familiar with, in some capacity. And I think Sergio is just hitting it really hard right now. And I know that he is updating websites. He is busy out there, and I get emails from him regularly. So I feel like they are really wanting employers to use this, but to date, I can't say that we've had any of our employers actually use it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's red tape. I don't know if it's complicated. I don't know if employers just don't want to work to get it. But in addition to the $3,500 per year for each apprentice, they can get an additional $1,500 here in Illinois if the employer and or the apprentice is in an underserved, underrepresented area. So there is a lot of money out there to be had for employers. And all of us are probably working with our WIOA partners. And so there's additional funding if you are able to get very much on the very front end of a training program and get all the paperwork done up front. I think that's where our employers find that sometimes a difficult task to take advantage of any type of determining if apprentices are WIOA eligible. It has to be done so far in advance. So if anybody has anything else to add to that, please, let us chime in later when we have some discussion about how they're getting their employers to do these tax credits. You got anything there, Kurt? No?
I think that was an area that was really interesting when we heard at the Capit convening last summer with Robert Lerman from the Apprenticeships for America, where he said like his research bore the same thing out, that nationally where tax credits are available, they're not usually taken by employers. We're not necessarily pro that or anything. We try to be very supportive with employers, connect them to the state resources, connect them to WIO and CareerLink funding or that WIA funding. But I think once the apprenticeships get going, the employers hire, they just see that immediate return on investment with the skills that are being gained, the reduction in turnover, and the fact that their positions are getting filled. So it almost seemed like, at least with larger employers, the financing is complicated and there's a lot of different divisions, and a lot of times they decide not to chase that down. But I think as the programs get more established, we are working with more employers now that are taking a second look at it. And I think in the future, a lot will be taking advantage of the $3,500 per year per apprentice tax credit. But I think one thing Veronica and I did early in the process trying to bring on employers is we kind of like led with that, like, hey, your program can be free. And that didn't move the needle. And it like blew our mind for like year after year after year. It didn't really move the needle. And so now we rip off the Band-Aid. We say we're asking you to pay a whole bunch of costs up front. Everything's going to be on you. We'll manage all the paperwork and the wraparound supports and make sure that students come in or apprentices come in and stay and are successful. And that's really been the selling point, is just making that comparison between what was the old model that's not getting positions filled, and you're paying sometimes the 50% of the salary of a position by the time you search it, select, onboard, and then perhaps lose that person in 4 or 5 months. That the apprenticeship tuition costs are just very low. So.
Yep. final pro really, and I know that it is one of the 7 key elements as well, is the once upon successful completion, and that is completion of the instructional training and the on-the-job learning. So those hours and those time spent in instruction, all of that has to be complete. And so there is still coordination sometimes even after the apprentice leaves here. They're still continuing OJL hours in the work site. But that then, when that is all successfully completed, they do get that portable credential. And the importance of that portable credential is, again, looking at the fact that should that apprentice leave, or, you know, employers, like Kurt had said earlier, can kind of start comparing each other. They know that they're working towards, we're going back to those occupational standards. We're going back to the 7 key elements of an apprenticeship. So they know that if someone has been in a registered apprenticeship program, that they have a very high level of competency, and that they have actually worked through, you know, standardized and organized training. So I think that just brings us full circle, you know, back to that. And that in addition to those, depending on, you know, how you have them, the coursework that you have them taking at your community college, they're going to be earning your microcert, your certifications, and your degrees, you know. So in addition, they are filling their own backpack with lots of certificates and skills that are also transferable depending on where they go, you know, in their careers. So unfortunately, we have to talk about some cons with registered apprenticeship. And I know that, go ahead.
Can I add one thing before we move to
Yep.
the cons?
Of course.
We got a question in the chat that asked if we could go into a little bit more detail on spending grant funds, if not on tuition and fees. I think that's a really good question. When we look at our grants, I would say in general, about 3/4 of our grant funds are going on the personnel line. So you can have like a director, or a portion of someone that's doing some high-level conversations with other employers, like maybe 5% on someone that's maybe at the VP level or executive director level that's pushing apprenticeships with employers. Then the director of apprenticeships, you know, if you've had the role for a while, maybe 40% of that is covered by the grant, so that covers your registered apprenticeships. And you could still do non-registered apprenticeships if you want. Then you have your wraparound supports and success connections, and tutoring. You can put hours there. So a good, you know, 40% of a role of a coordinator. And then the success coaches, you could hire 100% part-time or full-time success coach on there. So try to get up to maybe 70%, 75% of your project on personnel. And then on contractual, maybe put a good $20,000 there to make videos that tell the story of your apprentices, your employers, your faculty, everything, all the good stuff that's going on at the college. Bring in a marketing firm, have them film up those videos, get the videos on YouTube, TikTok, and get those out. And then on materials line, a lot of times you can support some high cost programs. So we've stood up a tool and die program through our apprenticeship that if we just tried to build that at the college, we would not have had students in it. But there is enough demand from employers, and they're willing to upskill people from maybe a laborer or an assembler into a tool and die. And so if you can pull a few employers, you could stand up a whole new program there. And so we've used maybe $20,000 a year to support materials and equipment for a number of programs. And then training and not training, travel. So I'd say the last thing is to really invest in your team and your college and helping people learn about apprenticeships. So to send people to the AACC Workforce Development Institute, maybe the Lightcast Institute, that Lightcast on economic modeling and workforce development, and then Apprenticeship for America, and any other kind of like apprenticeship focused workforce development trainings. And other areas, Veronica?
No, I think you covered them all. Yeah, I'm glad you did that.
We also partner with some of our local unions that have apprenticeships. So sometimes on grants, you can, if they require their apprentices to pay out-of-pocket costs, you could write some direct training the direct training tab
Yes.
onto your grant and then remove some of those barriers on their end. So we've
Mhm.
partnered with our plumbers and pipe fitters and our electricians to pay for their required textbook materials. So maybe it's like $300 an apprentice or $500 an apprentice, but then they can reduce those barriers for people coming into their program through your grant. And so that's one thing that we learned from Danville Area Community College, that they'd had that
Mhm.
partnership with their local unions, and word got around and our unions came to us and asked if we could partner in that way as well. And that was a very easy win, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really neat relationship as well, because it's, you know, it's a little bit different alignment in the community. And so that really does, you know, that shows that we're, you know, we're again, that community college, we're taking part in our community and helping with those resources. And I know that I just got a call from my local 99 and they are saying that the apprentices are like, are you coming back? So I know that they like it. So a little extra money in their pockets is, I'm sure, helpful. So all right, well, on to cons. Really, and this first one is just kind of like, just what are we going to talk about, right? But it really is, you do have to work with an employer to identify the differences between an internship and an apprenticeship. You know, the word apprenticeship is getting more common. It also comes with a lot of different definitions attached to it itself. And then when you talk about internships, I'm currently attending here in McLean County an internship workshop for employers, figuring how, teaching them how to stand up internship programs within their work sites. And it's interesting hearing the employers in that room talk about these things because, you know that internships don't mean going and getting coffee, but they really don't know how to use an internship, which is really a valuable employability tool for students, right? I work in the Career Center, so I know that we take them to a job site, they get interested or they don't. We do a job shadow, they interested or they don't. We take them to an internship, then we move it, you just keep moving it. So introducing these things to employers are also very valuable in figuring out how they want to create their workforce. But typically, employers want people to be around for a long time. They want them to be a cultural fit. And, apprenticeship really does do that. They're built within the agreement with the Department of Labor. You've got a probationary period, so that really kind of makes it very easy, very clean cut for an employer. If the fit isn't there, there is a way to sever that, right? So just identifying those differences. One's long-term, one is really getting the student some experience. Then when we go into establishing the apprenticeship program within the company, you guys heard us talk about we've talked here before about how important it is for the employer to really buy into this program, right? Like it is employer or industry driven. So that employer really needs to have staff within their company that is responsible for the program and or the apprentices, because you have got processes that need to be in place. You could be tracking hours. You are looking, you're trying to identify mentors who it has to be really posed in a very positive manner to get mentors to want to take time away from their job to teach someone else. You have people who really like that, and then you have people who are just in the right positions and should be doing that. Then you have the billing, like with us in particular, and probably many of you, you're working with third-party billings. And so you have to have those contacts all together. So within that company, it is very important for them to understand what the apprenticeship program is, where it's going, what the outcomes need to be, and all that stuff in the middle. And if there are records to be kept, the bottom one, then they have to do that too, which can be a con for an employer. They know that they have to have that special file cabinet filled with all those papers for those apprentices, where if they just hire someone off the street, it just goes into HR. So, looking at those things, I think we could elaborate a lot on them, but I know you guys get the idea. So Kurt, any other things there?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, all right. So go apprentices, go reps. I don't know, whatever. All right, thank you.
All right. I think I get to follow Veronica. And I think Corey from City Colleges. Good to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of names and faces I don't know. So looking forward to hopefully connecting soon. But I'll kind of go quick because I definitely think we want to leave enough time for Q&A and just to have a meaty discussion. But I just want to kind of start this whole unregistered conversation by piggybacking on something Veronica said. I think all of us in the apprenticeship world know that the space is getting a little diluted and watered down. And so I think even this approach with unregistered, that we continue to take seriously the structures that are in place and help to avoid kind of that watering down of what a true apprenticeship should look like. So I think that's definitely a role community colleges are playing. And I think that's some of the reason we see the next funding models or funding guidelines or future grants to be a little bit more education aligned, knowing that students are walking out with credentials. So taking this seriously. So that said, I'll just preface very quickly on there's no obviously the gold standard is the registered apprenticeship, but every one of our markets is a little different, and so we kind of have to work in conjunction with our markets in geography and region and our collaborators. So things might look a little differently. And so I'll just kind of give you a sense of where CCC sits. So we came out of the gate, very heavily in apprenticeships, like many of you, 5-6 years ago. At that moment, and continue today, a lot of our steam around this work is employer driven, particularly from one group which is called Chicago Apprentice Network. And what those founding organizations and such and our community thought was, we're not going to keep the momentum of apprenticeships in Chicago if we have to go at the pace of the DOL process. And so we bypassed parts of that to kind of really get our infrastructure and get apprenticeships set up. And so majority of our apprenticeships are not registered. That said, now that we have foundations and we have a lot of apprenticeships, we are starting to now register more of them. So currently today, CCC of all of our apprenticeships, CCC only holds one of registrations for community health worker. About a dozen, give or take, employers have registered their apprenticeships, but the rest are unregistered. Let's see, I was going to say. So I think that's all I'll probably say about CCC. I will drop into the chat a link of a case study that just came out from Business Roundtable that talks about the Chicago Apprentice Network and kind of lead we've taken. But again, we promote both registered and unregistered, and every employer development conversation, we do provide the advantages of registered apprenticeship and kind of help walk through that. So something we should all aspire to. So that said, I'll just kind of whip through these, like I mentioned, pretty quickly. For pros, I think Lavon said it earlier on. I was going to say like two big differences, right? Unregistered, it's one, flexibility, and two, it's just speed and timing. And so again, a reason why we went a different route. The development process can be somewhat accelerated, provided again, all these pros and cons should be couched within the fact that we are trying to hold as true to those now 7 hallmarks of a DOL registered apprenticeship as possible. Again, as Lavon mentioned, sometimes the RTI and on-the-job training hours might differ, but all those other elements can really be held pretty strongly into the footing of unregistered apprenticeships. So again, this accelerated pace, and that comes in many respects. It's just this option, for example, if maybe there isn't even existing occupation stood up with DOL, it does allow you again to skip the process overall. Also that ability to start apprenticeships anytime in the academic year. So we're able to kind of start and stop apprenticeships with great flexibility. Second, I think there's some flexibility in our models. So we do again, this is employer to meet the employers where they've been at. We do everything from a 15 to finish, as we call it, which is that one term. So about a 6 to 9 month apprenticeship, the 1 year to 2 year to 3 years. So really runs the gamut based on the experience level that an employer might be looking for. So some employers, are the traditional 2-year, the Aons and Zurichs of the world, where they're taking new students throughout a whole full 2-year journey. And then there's other employers who might identify that their talent, for example, cybersecurity at McDonald's, they want students to have a full year of coursework under their belt before they enter into their apprenticeship program, which actually is registered. by McDonald's. So gives us a little bit of flexibility in how long people are in that process, how quickly an employer might be able to access the talent and convert them. But we'll talk about that also in the cons section. And then again, the flexibility on occupational pathways. Sometimes there might be employers, for example, tech. We found this a lot in tech. So our hospitals and different organizations, they want to hire apprenticeships, but they're looking for more generalist techs, not someone who maybe is specifically in cybersecurity or specifically in software development. And so they then can source students, everything from computer science to any of those tracks, knowing that every tech track has the foundations within IT and tech. And so it gives them greater flexibility for students to kind of choose and get into a more general track before they lock into a very specific role. And then again, I think Danielle added this, it just allows some companies to get their feet wet. And that's frankly the conversation with a lot of people was, let's just start here. We can always register this in the future. And so it's an opportunity for some employers to kind of get their feet wet. All right. I know we have Q&A after this, so I'm going to just launch real quick over to the other side. Cons, obviously, when we're not registering, it does shift the burden to employers, particularly if an employer is wanting their program to be registered. And so, again, this is why we hope to register more of our programs so we can provide that service and the employer doesn't have to do it. Two, obviously, employers are not eligible for those financial incentives that Veronica mentioned, and then also, students are not getting that portable credential from DOL. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there can be, again, this whole notion of really kind of protecting that experience. While employers sometimes might want their talent quicker, we really have to work case by case with the employer to make sure that they're going to be enough supports, for example, in those condensed, maybe that 6 to 9 month or 1 year. We really need to be able to instill that there will be enough time and enough presence for students, apprentices to kind of experience the culture, see if the culture fits, how belonging, how they feel there, do they want to work there? And then of course, are there enough times to check off the competencies that everyone is looking to accomplish? And so there are some employers who we kind of discourage from doing that because they don't have those supports. And then we see employers like an engineering firm here who does a 9 month, and they're phenomenal at all the things that we would want to see. And so for them, we trust in the experience, and it's been working. And so we're not as concerned that the students aren't getting that full experience, OTJ, before they convert more quickly. And then last, unfortunately, all the work CCC has done in apprenticeships, hundreds of 600 plus apprenticeships later, none of our data is represented when we see all the charts from DOL. So not optimal. So again, we're kind of on a journey. I think for folks, if you have something that's working, I think don't necessarily go this direction, but just know if it's something where you have a specific program or maybe you're more time bound, that this just is an alternative in the whole ecosystem of apprenticeship. So I think the next slide is Q&A. So I'll turn it back to whoever's leading that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Corey. And I can jump in here to help out with having some conversation and some discussion. The chat has been really great. Nice and timely that there was a college who's talking about this very topic this week, and some good questions that have come up here. So really wanted to open this up to people on the call to be able to talk about some of the questions on pros and cons that maybe didn't ask during the presentation. And we can certainly get into some of these questions. If there's an example of one model where it proved very successful or very challenging to make it registered or unregistered, or are there certain occupations that are harder to make apprenticeable? So wanted to start to see if we have any questions from anyone. You're welcome to unmute yourself and sort of ask the first question or put something out there to the group.
I don't have any questions. Sorry, this is Elissa from Elgin Community College. I guess I can turn my camera on. And my camera's over there and over here, so we're having that kind of morning. I don't really have a question per se. I just want to say this is a super timely discussion because literally just this week, my dean was like, we need to look at registered versus unregistered and kind of the pros and cons and see if that's a direction we want to move. From our perspective, it's going to be probably more appealing to some occupations than others, because what we found with some of our potential registered apprenticeship partners is in some industries like healthcare and, you know, business, a journeyman isn't really a super understood credential right now. And I mean, our fire chief who runs our EMS or our emergency services program was literally like, what does a journeyman do for a firefighter? And I was like, there's like this small thing that it can help with, but it's not as heavily used as it is in like manufacturing and things like that. So we're thinking that unregistered apprenticeships might be more appealing to some of those industries like healthcare or business, where they don't really want to go through all the DOL rigmarole, but they like the idea, you know, the idea of the apprenticeship with the student working and someone paying for their education and then them having the on the job experience. So it's definitely something that we're starting to look really seriously at, because right now all we have are registered apprentice students. We don't have any unregistered. So we're really looking at if that's a path we want to take to move forward to kind of help expand what we can offer and how we can help employers in the community that don't want to deal with the DOL, but still like the model.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering if anybody on the call currently has sort of a hybrid approach where they might have a mix of some registered and some unregistered based on the type of industry or the type of occupation that they're looking at.
I'm sorry, I can speak. Hopefully my internet connection is good enough. Nope, it's probably not. Never mind. I'll chat.
We can hear you okay.
Okay, I will try. I'm from Oakton College. We do have a mix of registered and unregistered, but right now we're not serving as the registered sponsor. ICAT is, I'm sure several of you are familiar, and they're really working on our manufacturing in our advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing. We were working on trying to do a registered apprenticeship for one of our local fire departments who's really excited about doing apprenticeships, but there were quite a few restrictions that really their union had. And so we ended up doing an unregistered apprenticeship with the City of Evanston's fire department. We are looking at expanding both areas, but we definitely are finding that there's some industries that we think are going to be better served by unregistered based on length of time of our certificates, you know, the needs of them. I think right now we're looking at hoping to move into an unregistered space with our import-export certificate, because we are located near O'Hare Airport. There's a big import-export need there, and then also an automotive.
Shannon, thank you for sharing. That's great. Go ahead, Alyssa.
I was just going to add what she said, ping something in my brain about a discussion we'd had related to the wages and the union involvement. You know, we're registering a new CNA apprentice employer, but they are a union employer. And so they can't, you know, they offer increases in a very specific method. And you know, we were able to extend the length of the apprenticeship term so that we could get at least 2 or 3 of those progressive wage categories met. But I think that's another opportunity where you have a place that they really can't offer wage increases outside of their union schedule. I think that's where an unregistered apprenticeship might be appealing to them, because then they can just use their normal wage system and we don't have to try to get special permission to put in those increments.
You know, Alyssa, I think, you know, for us, it's just another tool in the toolkit. Now, I will say another con would be, so I'm a little jealous sometimes of our friends at Harper, Heartland, who have very structured, right? This is what we offer, and it's what we offer. And because another con then is you're having to manage to a lot of different things, and we're choosing to be more responsive to the employer need and meet them where they're at and doing a lot of that. But it does put a lot of pressure then on your team to have to then cater to all that. So I'm jealous of organizations that can have that more strict.
That's our big red flag in what I've been putting together again just this week is, you know, shifting the burden over to my staff, which is me and 2 apprenticeship coordinators. So 3 of us to do all of it. So that's definitely something we're looking at. I'll be calling you and Heartland soon, I'm sure.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Bessa, please add in.
I think the healthcare occupations really we did register them with the DOL, but it's just I think adds on more burden to kind of employer, and to me especially, you know, at Harper, like ICAT, a German employer, the Swiss, European-based employers, they understand more of the apprenticeship program. They come very prepared when they reach to us to offer apprenticeship programs. And with healthcare and, you know, 24 hours, the hospitals and their shift, and I think, and because after the program, after they complete like the CNA, LPN, MA, all of that, they require state registrations exam. I think unregistered, it would have been, you know, just great way to go. But again, this funding available and then tax credits, that is very, as Kurt said, you know, it's very marketable when they reach out and you say like, yeah, this is the cost. However, you can offset because the program is registered and you can get the tax credits. But as far as kind of, you know, complicating, I think, because the apprentices do complete the program, take the state exam, and also like this 2 days off to 3 days on in the hospital setting is kind of doesn't work. So that's my intake on health career occupations.
Thank you so much. I think that's really valuable to think about how different industries respond to those structures differently. Anybody else have, you know, some thoughts on sort of having some registered, some unregistered? If not, there's been some conversation in the chat about unions and partnering with unions. And so wondering, it looks like the question here from Julie is, you know, have any of the unions felt that you were competing against them? And if so, how have you handled that to make it a partnership? Anybody have experience working with unions? We've heard a few on the call today already.
Danielle,
Yeah.
I unfortunately had to join late, and so I missed the majority of this, but a comment that I wanted to say, and maybe it's already been touched on, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating what somebody else had said. I have found that when we do an unregistered apprenticeship, what once was scary becomes the known or the unscary. And it has led a good path to registered apprenticeship. They had some misconceptions about exactly what it would take. And after they see the model, because I try to still collect all the information and do, you know, the memorandum of understanding and all the stuff, for lack of a better word to put it. And once they realized that it wasn't as scary as they thought, it has led a few to the path of registered apprenticeship.
Thank you for adding that, Tanya. That's great.
I would like to make a statement about the piece with the unions. I would love to know more about that if anyone has experience. I don't personally have experience working with union employers. I work with our students who are potential apprentices, but I do see competition in the applicant pool. When working with potential apprentices who are talking with us about our options, they will ask questions about the unions and how our programs differ. But what I find is that I get a lot of applicants who are not able to be selected for for the unions. So sometimes I feel like we're getting the leftovers. And I've been very pleased with our applicants, and I think we have some great apprentices. And some of these individuals who have been turned down from the unions do end up doing great things with our program. But I feel like the applicants typically view the unions as a stronger opportunity for them and view us as their second choice.
And I don't have a success story to speak about the unions yet, but I know that for many of our non-trade unions, so Kurt's statement about those unions, yeah, very much kind of still in that traditional process where we probably all serve more as the pre-apprenticeship trainer. But for our other unions, so more of those like in the city, they have been coming around to a little, I mean, they're curious. I think because the world's so different now, they're at least now curious to learn more about apprenticeship, since we found them very open to the conversations, and a couple of them even kind of helping to think outside the box of like, well, how can we make this so it isn't competitive? And so ideas around like, setting aside a few of those positions that are reclassed to a lower level, so you're not competing with the traditional role. Or modifying job postings just slightly, where the credentials that we're all providing would be kind of that little extra star on applicants, and so that they would kind of rise to the top of the pool. And so none of those have come to fruition, but that has been our more recent experience, I think, just because the world's so different right now.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of conversation around unions and partnering with them that we might want to, have some more conversation at a different time, because I think it looks so different. It can be approached differently. There's so many to work with. And I think there's been some great conversation on the chat as well about registered apprenticeship programs and whether or not as an institution, if you serve as the sponsor, or if you're working with a company who sponsors their own program. So if you haven't had a chance to respond on the chat, please make sure that you do so, because I think this is great information for us to start looking at and understanding, how do institutions serve their community? And in some cases, it's as the sponsor itself, and other times it's as the RTI provider. And some schools are only doing one or the other, and some are doing both. So I do see another question on the chat about employers utilize WIOA funding and the tax credit. If it's, what have people been told if it's an either or and not both? I'm wondering if people have had experience with that. Can they utilize the WIOA funding as part of the apprenticeship, but also then apply for that tax credit at the end of the year? Anybody have an answer for Jennifer on that one?
I think you can't double dip. So if your costs are already paid by a source, you can't also use the tax credit. But if there was not all of the funds were covered, you could use any remaining balance that you paid for the tax credit. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Kurt, that's been my understanding as well, but that might be something worth for us to get some clarification on and be able to provide back to the group to know with certainty what that looks like. Great, thank you. Other questions? And people are welcome to unmute and see if they have questions or just information they want to share on their experience of registered versus unregistered.
There was a question about what personnel we use to run an apprenticeship program. Just kind of wanted to open that up to folks and what their thoughts are.
This is Julie Galati. I'm the one that had asked that question about the personnel. I was kind of wondering about, about how much more extra work this was and how you managed it with your current staff, or if you needed to hire additional staff to take on, this sort of thing and have it be successful.
And are you in the apprenticeship space at all at the moment?
We work with the building trades right now for construction. We're checking into other industries and so right now we're pretty much just training people in like a pre-construction setting so that they're a better applicant when they go and apply at the trades. Now if the trades need 20 people and you're applicant number 21 in the scoring mechanism of your test and your interview, you might not get in that round. You might have to wait based on that union's intake cycle. But we're not in other industries, and so I think that would probably be our sweet spot. We've worked with the building trades enough for them to know we're not a competitor. We're trying to strengthen their pipeline. But there obviously is sensitivity to that since they spend millions of dollars on their curriculum and get it all approved through the DOL, all of that. So I think it'd be worth checking into other industries such as manufacturing or health or things like that.
Yeah,
So
I think that's exactly right. Look at the programs that you have extra seats in your courses that don't always fill, or courses where you know that students could benefit if someone was paying their bill for them, which would probably be just about every area. And then looking at the needs for employers where they're saying, hey, we've got these open positions, we can't fill it, we can't fill it, we can't fill it. That's the perfect place to start. And likely that won't be the same place as, I mean, the trades have there's their things, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity, as you said. And then I think you can make that as part of like your strategic enrollment management plan to make this like a core focus of how you're advancing EDI, how you're ensuring that students there's alignment between what they're studying at the college and what they're going to do for a career, and that you're meeting that workforce need for employers. So it's kind of like a win-win-win, and you could probably tie apprenticeships back to about 3/4 of your strategic plan. And then once you kind of have that established with your like vice president of academic affairs or provost and the vice president, maybe the enrollment services area, that could be like a strategic avenue to invest in for the personnel. And bringing in someone that knows billing, knows the admissions process, knows the CTE programs, knows the scheduling is like a great way to kind of launch that program or start it. And we started really small at Heartland, so we created one new position that Veronica stepped into that role and like really spearheaded this forward. And then her and I worked together to kind of bridge the employer conversations back to the internal conversations to get everything established. And so we managed with 2 people for about 4 years, and now we're bursting at the seams. So we have to bring on probably 2 or 3 more people to be able to take it from, we have 50 apprentices now. And so you could probably handle like 1 full-time person on the project and then 10, 15, 20% of another role on it for the first 4 years or so, depending on how big your region is and how fast you want to grow. And then very quickly, I think you'll find 5 people to handle all of the elements, but it really drives enrollment.
So kind of on that note then, does anybody, I mean, are these courses offered all on the credit side, or is it a mixture between credit and non-credit, or all non-credit side of the house?
It can be both from DOL, registered or non-registered. So you can do a truck driving apprenticeship. It could be all non-credit, really short. It could be all credit. And generally, I think a lot of us try to not create brand new sections for apprentices. We're like filling existing sections. We're working with our existing schedules, but we do work with faculty to try and make schedules more employer friendly. So if you can tell the employer, if you can release your employees 1 day and a half or 2 days, depending on how fast they want them to complete, then you get your schedule in line. So they're with you 2 days and at the employer 3 days. But we're seeing some employers that want it to be just 1 day. And then that's really hard for like an 8-week class or 16-week class. Like everything's Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. Like, how do you make it 1 day? But we're figuring that out now too. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I think this has been a really great conversation and good information shared. We do know it's 10 o'clock right now, and people are probably hopping off already for their next call, but we have a recorded version of the session today and the PowerPoint slides. And so we'll pass that on ICCB, I think Angela has already said she'll get that up on the website for people to be able to reference that. Anything else people want to add before we close out for the day?
We will be continuing these monthly all summer long. I know it's April and we're not at the end of the semester yet, but some of us are starting to look at the end of the semester and summer and breaks and all those things. These are scheduled the second Wednesday of every month at this point through December. So we know some of you will be gone in June, some of you will be gone in July, you'll be back in August, you'll be, whatever. So just know that we are continuing with these at this point throughout the summer. So just make sure you've got them on the calendar. And you're welcome to attend. If you've got any questions, please reach out. We'll do what we can. And again, remember the listserv is there. You can ask if you've got a question after this that you want to throw on the listserv, and anybody can answer that. Also, remember, if you do a reply, it is going to the entire listserv. So if I send an email out and Val wants to send me her private answer and she hits reply, it's going to everyone. So just as another reminder of that fact. All right, I think we're good. Kurt's got his and Veronica's emails in the chat. Yes, Besa, I can stay. And have a great week.